Welcome to the Future Pulse podcast, where we dive into the world of innovation and technology. My name is Melica, and I'm the CEO and director of Skill Talks, which is an AI tech recruitment company operating across the globe. Today, I have with me, it's Shaunak from Fireworks AI. He is the field CTO. Absolute pleasure to have you on here.
Hi, Melica. Absolute pleasure to be on the podcast as well. And thank you for having us.
No, and thank you for joining me. So tell our audience a bit more about how you ended up at Fireworks, and also tell us a bit more about your background.
Yeah. So my background starts from me being at Google. I was recruited out of India back in 2007, worked through different parts of Google and ended up being in Google Drive storage and indexing teams, where I ended up leading the infrastructure of those teams. From there, I moved over to a startup called Instabase, which was a very small startup out of MIT. We were in document processing, content understanding space. I was there for about 6 years, saw these companies scale from about 8 people to about 300 people. And so as part of this journey, I saw roles across sales, GTM, engineering, recruiting, etc. And in the end, I was leading the entire infrastructure organization at Instabase. Um, while working at Instabase, we realized that LLMs have had a huge shift in sort of the landscape of how you build applications. And while at Instabase we were using LLMs to build out our application called AI Hub, I really wanted to focus on my own expertise around building out a platform. And Fireworks AI was at that point the best and still the best inferencing platform. And so I decided to take a leap of faith. Lynn, who is our CEO, and I had like some mutual acquaintances, and so we chatted through that, and we figured out that it would be a great fit. Fireworks was again a small company, only 20 people, and we were looking to expand rapidly in the GDM space. And this was a missing piece, which is my role of the field CTO, where we sort of bridge the gap between the product strategy, where the market is, where the customers are. And so we meet with a lot of partners, we meet with a lot of customers, we help evangelize Fireworks outside, and we bring in the feedback from the field back to our product team so that like we can implement it. And so having previously seen the growth of a small startup, this was a role that I was naturally fit for, where you could work on engineering, you could work on GTM. And so I decided to be here, and I have been here for the last year and a half and still going strong.
Fantastic. So for anyone unfamiliar, what does Fireworks actually do in the AI ecosystem?
Yeah, so Fireworks is an autonomous intelligence platform. We help your Gen AI companies, enterprises build out applications on Fireworks. We have an entire suite of fine-tuning systems, inference systems, etc. And we are like the fastest inference provider out there today. What we really want to push the AI ecosystem towards is co-design of model and product, and continually improving the quality of model based on the feedback that you get from your product, which is why we call ourselves like the autonomous intelligence company.
Right. Okay. Right. So you mentioned that you work closely with enterprises. What's the sort of the real state of AI adoption right now? Like, are they still experimenting, or are we sort of seeing real deployment?
Yeah, so if we look at like the enterprise segment, or if we look at like the market segment, there are essentially three different segments. So the first one is your Gen AI companies, which are your Cursors of the world, your Source Graph, Cognitions, etc. They are building using AI as like the fundamental part of their product. They have figured out how to go from experimentation to product, and you have seen significant growth of these companies. The second segment is what we define your digital natives. So these are companies like Uber, DoorDash, etc., who have a very strong SaaS offering already, who have a very strong digital footprint, but are trying to figure out how to incorporate AI into their products.
Hmm.
With these companies, what we are seeing is that they've already figured out the experimentation part, but they're moving into the production part already. There are like use cases that Fireworks is powering, or open models are powering, and then enterprises have gone through the experimentation phase by evaluating OpenAI, Anthropic, Gemini, etc., the foundation labs, but they are still struggling to move from the experimentation phase into production phase. And that's just because the models that these companies use are trained on like public data. They're not actually trained on the data that enterprises really care for.
Right.
And these companies really want a very high level of accuracy. They have very less tolerance for hallucinations, etc. And so we are seeing a little bit of a struggle to move from experimentation into production phase.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, this year we feel that with the models evolving, with the tooling system evolving, there's going to be a huge push for companies, for larger enterprises, to move to production.
Yeah, that's interesting because I've actually got a couple of clients as well. They're actually looking for, there's definitely been a huge demand in people to focus on like the VLMs and sort of the creative aspects before things actually go into production. It's definitely like a huge appetite for it right now.
Yeah. Yeah, so what we are observing is that there are like very strong use cases
Mm.
that these new models are solving with very little effort. So some of the use cases, I think you talked about VLMs, right? I think OCR and document processing and those types of use cases have been here forever.
Mm.
Automation has been here forever. But if you look at like the strong capabilities of these models, even the open models, it's catching up to all the frontier labs. You have extremely strong OCR models that are coming through. VLMs have the ability to process documents that are extremely complex, that are very hard to read, that have like handwritten notes, etc. And then you have a lot of use cases around like customer success, customer chats, knowledge search, and so on, where we feel that AI has already solved a lot of problems,
Mm.
and I think that's the place where we will see a huge expansion happening this year.
Right. Interesting. What's the biggest misconception enterprises have about getting AI up and running then?
Yeah, I think there are essentially two things that I can think of right now.
Mm.
I think the first misconception is that um, the frontier models or just base models, whether it's open source, whether it's from frontier labs, will solve their problems. I think they will take you to 80% of the solution, but they will not go to 100%. I think to get to 100%, it really needs the power of your data. And I think like these enterprises are sitting on large amounts of data that's very proprietary to them. And so they can actually make use of that data quite a bit to actually fine tune their models and make it really customized to their performance needs, to their quality needs, etc. So that's number one conception is like one shot model will solve all the problems.
Mm.
You definitely need fine tuning, especially with like agent tech applications becoming like more and more pervasive. I think the second um, misconception that we're hearing is that the open models are not great, or the open models might have um, some sort of like malware that can be used to take your data and push it somewhere else. For example, the models that are from the Chinese origin companies. I think this is a huge misconception. I think what we have seen is that by definition, these models are open weights, which means that the customers can actually run a bunch of experiments to see how these models are performing,
Mhm.
and how they are being used. Second is because these models are open weights, you can actually run them in your private VPC. So you can actually have a much stricter control on your privacy, on your compliance laws, as compared to like the other frontier models, which sort of act in like an API capacity. And so I think these are like the two big misconceptions that
Mm.
we have seen. I think adoption in enterprises is going to be very strong with open models, as long as they sort of figure out a way to use the data and get around like these compliance hurdles.
Right. Okay. Good insight there. So this sort of leads up to AI engagements. Let's say I'm a CIO or someone like you, like a CTO at a large enterprise, for example. Where would I actually start? Like, what does a successful AI engagement look like from day one, in your opinion?
Yeah. So I think if I were a CIO or a CTO of a large company, I think there are already problems that we have seen are
Mm.
keep being solved by AI. I think the most common problem that you're seeing solved today, and which is affecting like me and my company as well, is the evolution of coding tools, or I would say developer productivity tools, right? I think the first step that a CIO or a CTO can take is sort of engage with these coding tools and figure out like how they can accelerate the development, or how can they improve the developer productivity of their own employees, and their own developer ecosystem. I think the second step is figuring out like the real use cases you have in your company, and figuring out like the market, and seeing where you can actually solve the problems.
Mm.
And so you have, as I was describing, you have use cases around VLMs, you have use cases around automation, you have use cases around chats and conversation. And we know that AI has already solved these problems. So it is up to the CIOs and CTOs to sort of push their own teams, whether it is enterprise, whether it is legal team, whether it is the engineering team, whether it is the GTM teams, to incorporate these tools, and figure out like where can they have like the biggest value of their money. Do some quick POCs, figure out where you can see wins. Does it
Hmm.
solve your quality problem? Does it solve your performance problem? And I think once you're done with that, then involve the second layer, which is go about fine tuning these models. Think a little bit about um, whether you can use like different types of models, what kind of agents you have to build. Does it require human in the loop? Because right now AI can solve problems, but it still
Mm.
requires a lot of human interaction. And so these are sort of like the steps that I would see like somebody at a senior leadership take on figuring out like how to bring in um, bring in AI into their companies, or have like engagements around with like different vendors on figuring out like how AI can actually help scale their companies even further.
Right. Okay. And so do you think enterprises, do you think they can use their own data to train models? Or would you say that's risky territory?
I would argue that data is the moat for these enterprises. Um, I think that there has been a lot of misconception around using your data, and then the models might leak your data to whichever company that the model belongs to. I think that's completely false. You almost always have to use your data to get the most value from AI. We call this data flywheel, right? You get 80% of the way. You use your data, you evolve your model and your product together. And then this feedback loop becomes stronger and stronger as you run these applications in production, where you actually gather data from production, from user feedback, and you refine your models to sort of align them
Mhm.
with your use cases. And this is what leads to like very, very beautiful user experiences. And this is what leads to like really beautiful applications. And
Right.
so data is the commodity, data is the moat. And we think that data is going to be the biggest currency for these enterprises that they can actually use to really have great user experiences.
Mm, okay. So, in terms of fine tuning versus using off the shelf models, how should enterprises really think about that decision?
Yeah, I think so there are like multiple layers in
Mm.
which you can think about this problem. I think the when you're experimenting, you almost always want to experiment with a large model, whether it is single shot, whether it is zero shot, etc., because at least that will tell you whether there are problems that can be solved with AI. I think today there are like it can solve a lot of problems, but there are also some problems that it cannot solve. So experiment with larger models, frontier labs. Don't do fine tuning early on to figure out whether it can actually solve your problems. Once you have done that, then I think the next step happens, which is, okay, now that we have really figured out that a good POC has been built out, now we need to take this to production. And at that point, a lot of factors start to become important. Cost starts to become important. Latency starts to become important. Throughput starts to become important. At which point you really need to move from these larger models to their smaller alternatives to power your hundreds of agentic steps or hundreds of sub
Mm.
agents that you get called in your application. At that point, we encourage people to look at fine tuning of smaller models so that their performances, their cost, their optimizations are tuned on their data. And not only that, it would also give you higher quality results because you know your customers the best.
Yeah.
You have the data that validates that thesis. And so why not use that to actually make your agents better, make your applications better, and give beautiful experiences?
That's really interesting insight. It's really good to get a perspective on that. So, in the next 1 or 2 years, who wins in AI then? Is it going to be the startups or is it going to be the enterprises?
Um, Great question. I think, yeah, I think so. I will say that startups have one advantage that enterprises don't have. I think they have the advantage of speed, and they have advantages of less regulation from their own internal teams, less organizational overhead, etc. I think startups will always continue to lead the way. There is no denying that. But I think enterprises who are falling behind today will definitely get their act together. Because, as I was saying, they have the largest amount of data that startups don't have access to. Startups only have started to get access to that data because they have
Mm.
built out a strong data flywheel. But these enterprises are sitting on such a huge, like, gold mine of data that they can use it to sort of power themselves. So startups will start to catch up in this year. I don't think that they will be able to take over. Sorry, enterprises will start to catch up this year. I don't think
Mm.
that they will be able to take over like startups because they are moving very, very rapidly. But next year, I think is the place where the gap is going to close significantly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the time where like data starts to become important, models start to become important, fine tuning starts to become even more important, and then enterprises might actually win. It's a short term versus long term play.
Yeah, no, of course. Well, thank you so much, Shaunak, for jumping on the podcast. Really, really good insights from you.
Yeah, thank you, Malika, for again having us, and it was a great conversation.
Thank you.